in the quiet stretches of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where ocean air drifts inland and neighborhoods settle into predictable routines after sunset. No one expected a disappearance that would slowly unravel into one of Horry County's most disturbing cases. In the year 2020, amid a world already strained by uncertainty, 46-year-old Gregory Vincent Rice vanished, leaving behind 4 children, unanswered questions, and a trail of silence that would grow louder with each passing day. Gregory Rice was not a stranger to hardship, nor was he a man living on the fringes of society. He was a father of 4, a man known to those close to him as devoted, present, and protective of his children. His life revolved around providing, maintaining stability, and staying connected to his family. Those who knew him described a man who did not disappear without reason, a man whose absence immediately felt wrong. On the 2nd day of October in the year 2020, Gregory was last seen in the Myrtle Beach area. The details of that day would later become critical, dissected carefully by investigators and journalists alike. At the time, however, nothing about the day screamed danger. There was no dramatic farewell, no public argument, no indication that Gregory was about to step into harm's way. He simply went missing, quietly and without spectacle. When Gregory failed to return home and stopped answering calls, concern grew quickly. Family members reached out, retracing his steps, hoping for a simple explanation: a phone lost, a misunderstanding, an unplanned delay. But as hours turned into days, hope began to erode. On the 5th day of October, Gregory Rice was officially reported missing, triggering a law enforcement response that would soon expand far beyond a routine welfare check. Horry County authorities began their investigation cautiously, as they do in missing adult cases. Adults are legally allowed to disappear, and investigators must first determine whether foul play is even suspected. But almost immediately, Gregory's disappearance raised red flags. There was no financial activity, no confirmed sightings, no communication with friends or family. For a man deeply connected to his children, this silence was deafening. Search efforts intensified. Law enforcement canvassed areas Gregory was known to frequent, spoke with those closest to him, and worked to reconstruct the final hours before he vanished. Each interview added fragments to the puzzle, but no clear picture emerged. Instead, contradictions surfaced. Stories did not align perfectly. Small inconsistencies began to stand out, the kind that seasoned investigators learned never to ignore. As days stretched into weeks, the case took on a heavier tone. What began as a missing person investigation slowly shifted toward something more ominous. Detectives started to consider the possibility that Gregory Rice had not left voluntarily. The absence of any confirmed movement, paired with troubling statements gathered during interviews, suggested that Gregory may have encountered danger close to home. Behind the scenes, investigators focused their attention on individuals within Gregory's inner circle. Statistically, when an adult disappears under suspicious circumstances, the truth often lies not with strangers, but with those closest to the victim. This case would prove no different. Among those scrutinized was Megan Marie Jackson, the mother of Gregory's 4 children. Their relationship history, custody dynamics, and recent interactions became critical points of inquiry. Also drawing attention was Christopher Allen Dauntel, a man whose professional background would later shock the public, a former deputy coroner employed in Horry County. His knowledge of death investigations, evidence handling, and forensic procedures would eventually cast a long shadow over the case. At this early stage, however, none of that was public knowledge. To the outside world, Gregory Rice was simply a missing father, his face appearing in news reports and social media posts, his name repeated with growing urgency. Each day without answers deepened the pain for his children, who were left grappling with the sudden absence of a man who had been a constant presence in their lives. Then, on the 8th day of November in the year 2020, more than a month after Gregory was last seen, the search took a devastating turn. His body was discovered in the Little Pee Dee River, near the border between Horry County and Marion County. The discovery confirmed the worst fears of those who had held onto hope. Gregory Rice was no longer missing. He was dead. The case instantly transformed from a disappearance into a homicide investigation. The question was no longer where Gregory was, but how he died, who was responsible, and how a father of four had ended up discarded in a river. The manner of discovery raised disturbing implications, suggesting planning, concealment, and an attempt to erase evidence. As investigators prepared to reveal what they had uncovered, the public would soon learn that this was not a crime of impulse, but one allegedly rooted in betrayal, manipulation, and a chilling misuse of professional knowledge. The truth, when it emerged, would shock Myrtle Beach and ripple far beyond Horry County. And this was only the beginning. Once Gregory Rice's disappearance was no longer treated as voluntary, investigators in Horry County shifted their focus with purpose. This was no longer about finding a man who might return home on his own. This was about uncovering what had gone wrong in the final days of his life. Every phone call, every movement, every relationship Gregory maintained was now viewed through a forensic lens. Detectives began where they always do in cases like this, with the victim's routine. Gregory was known to be consistent. He checked in with his children. He communicated regularly. He did not vanish without explanation. That consistency made the silence surrounding his disappearance especially alarming. The absence of financial transactions following the second day of October stood out. No bank withdrawals, no card usage, no digital footprint suggesting travel or a desire to start over. Gregory Rice had effectively stopped existing. Investigators reconstructed Gregory's final known movements in Myrtle Beach. Surveillance footage was reviewed. Witnesses were interviewed. Law enforcement worked to establish who last saw Gregory alive and under what circumstances. As this picture slowly formed, attention narrowed toward Gregory's personal relationships, particularly those marked by tension, unresolved conflict, or emotional volatility. The relationship between Gregory Rice and Megan Marie Jackson became a central focus. As the mother of his four children, she was deeply intertwined with his life. Investigators examined their history closely, custody arrangements, financial responsibilities, and recent interactions. This was not done out of assumption, but out of necessity. In homicide investigations, proximity matters, emotional history matters, and patterns matter. During interviews, detectives noted inconsistencies, small details that did not align perfectly, statements that shifted slightly over time. None of these alone proved wrongdoing, but together they formed a pattern investigators could not ignore. Each conversation was documented, reviewed, and compared against physical evidence and independent accounts. As law enforcement dug deeper, another name emerged: Christopher Allen Dauntel. At first glance, he did not fit the typical profile of a suspect the public might expect. He was employed by Horry County as a deputy coroner, a position that placed him within the death investigation system itself. His role required familiarity with bodies, scenes, and procedures most people never encounter. To investigators, this background was not just notable, it was concerning. The involvement of a county employee in a missing person investigation immediately raised the stakes. Detectives had to proceed carefully, ensuring the integrity of the case while navigating internal protocols. Any suggestion of misconduct within law enforcement adjacent roles demanded meticulous documentation and transparency. As interviews continued, detectives began uncovering information suggesting coordination rather than coincidence. Communications between individuals of interest were analyzed. Timelines were cross-checked. Investigators searched for evidence that Gregory's disappearance had been planned rather than spontaneous. The idea that this was an accident or random act grew increasingly unlikely. Behind closed doors, authorities prepared for the possibility that Gregory Rice had been killed, even before his body was found. This shift changed everything. Search efforts expanded beyond urban areas into waterways and remote locations. Resources were redirected. The tone of the investigation darkened. When Gregory's body was discovered in the Little PD River on the 8th day of November, the findings validated investigators' fears. This was no natural death. The location itself suggested deliberate concealment. Rivers are often used in crimes for one reason: they destroy evidence. Time, water, and current can erase details killers hope will never be recovered. The discovery triggered an immediate escalation. The Horry County Coroner's Office confirmed Gregory's identity, and law enforcement officially reclassified the case as a homicide investigation. Behind the scenes, warrants were prepared. Evidence already gathered was re-examined with new urgency. Statements were revisited. The focus sharpened. Public reaction was swift. The idea that a father of four had been killed, allegedly by someone he trusted, and that a county employee could be involved, sent shockwaves through Myrtle Beach and surrounding communities. Trust in systems designed to protect and serve was suddenly called into question. As investigators moved closer to arrests, they faced a chilling reality. This was not simply about violence. It was about betrayal, about the alleged misuse of professional knowledge, and about how easily someone could exploit familiarity with death to try to get away with murder. In the days that followed, authorities would make decisions that would forever alter the lives of everyone connected to Gregory Rice. The truth was beginning to surface, but it would reveal something far darker than anyone initially imagined. And the most disturbing details were still to come. With Gregory Rice's death confirmed, investigators no longer had the luxury of patience. The discovery of his body in the Little PD River transformed months of quiet analysis into an urgent push for accountability. Every prior interview, every digital trace, and every piece of physical evidence was now viewed through a single, sobering question: who had decided that Gregory Rice should not be allowed to live? The autopsy process began under heightened scrutiny. While investigators were careful about what details were released publicly, one fact became clear early on: Gregory's death was not accidental. The condition and placement of his body indicated intentional actions taken after his life had ended. This was not a tragedy caused by misfortune or poor judgment. It was, according to authorities, a deliberate act. As forensic findings were processed, detectives intensified their focus on the relationships surrounding Gregory in the days before he vanished. The timeline narrowed. Movements were compared minute by minute. Phone records were examined not only for calls and messages, but for silence, moments when communication stopped abruptly, suggesting something had gone wrong. Attention returned once again to Megan Marie Jackson and Christopher Allen Dauntel. Investigators now had enough information to begin placing their movements alongside Gregory's final known hours. When timelines intersected in ways that could not be explained by coincidence, law enforcement began preparing the groundwork for arrests. What made this case especially disturbing was the alleged involvement of someone trained in death investigation. Christopher Dauntel's role as a deputy coroner meant he understood how bodies are examined, how evidence deteriorates, and how scenes are reconstructed. Investigators would later suggest that this knowledge may have influenced decisions made after Gregory's death, including how and where his body was disposed of. For the public, this revelation was deeply unsettling. The coroner's office exists to speak for the dead, to ensure truth and accountability. The suggestion that someone within that system could be accused of participating in a killing shattered public trust and raised questions about oversight and ethics within institutions meant to protect the vulnerable. As evidence mounted, law enforcement executed arrests. Megan Marie Jackson was taken into custody and charged in connection with Gregory Rice's death. Soon after, Christopher Allen Dauntel was also arrested, facing serious charges that reflected the gravity of the alleged crime. The quiet missing person case that had once received limited attention was now a headline-making homicide investigation. Court documents revealed that prosecutors believed the crime involved planning and cooperation. This was not portrayed as a spontaneous act, but as one allegedly carried out with intent and coordination. The legal language used by the state painted a picture of betrayal at the most personal level, a father allegedly killed by individuals he trusted. Gregory's family was left to process grief alongside shock. For his 4 children, the loss was compounded by the circumstances surrounding his death. Not only had they lost their father, but the people accused of causing that loss were individuals deeply embedded in their lives. The emotional weight of that reality was impossible to measure. As the case moved into the court system, bond hearings and procedural motions followed. The legal process unfolded slowly, as it often does, frustrating those desperate for swift justice. Prosecutors emphasized the seriousness of the charges, while defense attorneys challenged evidence and timelines. Each hearing became another chapter in a story that refused to fade from public memory. Meanwhile, the community of Myrtle Beach watched closely. Conversations shifted from sympathy to outrage, from sorrow to fear. If this could happen to Gregory Rice, a man with roots, responsibilities, and connections, it could happen to anyone. The case forced residents to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, proximity, and how violence often hides in plain sight. By the end of this phase of the investigation, one thing was undeniable. Gregory Rice's death was no longer just a personal tragedy. It was a case that exposed cracks in relationships, systems, and assumptions about safety. And as the courtroom battle loomed, the final story of what happened to Gregory Rice was still incomplete. The truth had begun to emerge, but the most difficult questions were yet to be answered. As the legal process surrounding Gregory Rice's death moved forward, the case entered a new phase, one where silence was replaced by scrutiny, and private actions were dissected in public view. The arrests had brought a measure of validation to investigators and grief-stricken family members alike, but they also opened the door to a far more complicated journey. Justice, unlike investigation, does not move swiftly. It moves deliberately, often painfully so. Court filings began to outline what prosecutors believed had occurred in the days leading up to Gregory Rice's death. Though many details were withheld from public release, the overall picture suggested a sequence of events shaped by tension, control, and calculated decision-making. This was not portrayed as a momentary lapse or a crime born of chaos. According to the state, it was something far more deliberate. At the center of the case was the dynamic between Gregory Rice and Megan Marie Jackson. Their shared history as parents tied them together long after their romantic relationship had ended. Custody arrangements, financial responsibilities, and emotional conflicts had reportedly created strain, a pressure that investigators believed escalated rather than eased with time. Gregory's role as a father remained central to his identity, and those close to him maintained that his children were his highest priority. Prosecutors alleged that this relationship dynamic played a significant role in what unfolded. While legal documents avoided emotional language, the implications were clear. Unresolved conflict, combined with access and opportunity, can become a dangerous mix. In many true crime cases, the most devastating acts are rooted not in strangers or sudden encounters, but in relationships that once carried trust. Christopher Allen Dauntel's alleged involvement added another layer of complexity. As a deputy coroner, he occupied a position that demanded professionalism, objectivity, and respect for the dead. That background, prosecutors argued, made the alleged actions especially disturbing. The idea that someone trained to investigate death could be accused of facilitating it challenged public assumptions about who commits violent crimes. Investigators suggested that professional knowledge may have influenced decisions made after Gregory Rice's death. Where to place a body, how long it might take for discovery, what environmental factors could interfere with forensic evidence. These considerations, when viewed through the lens of the charges, painted a deeply unsettling picture, not just of violence but of calculated concealment. Bond hearings drew attention from across South Carolina. Prosecutors argued strongly against release, citing the seriousness of the charges and the potential risk to the community. Defense attorneys pushed back, emphasizing the presumption of innocence and challenging the strength of the evidence presented thus far. The courtroom became a battleground of narratives, each side framing Gregory Rice's death through sharply different lenses. For Gregory's family, attending these proceedings was both necessary and unbearable. Sitting mere feet away from those accused of causing his death forced them to relive their loss repeatedly. Each legal argument, each procedural delay, felt like another reminder that justice was not guaranteed. It had to be fought for. Outside the courtroom, public reaction continued to evolve. Early shock gave way to deeper reflection. Conversations began to center not only on the crime itself, but on systemic concerns. How could someone employed within a coroner's office allegedly participate in a homicide without immediate detection? What safeguards existed to prevent such abuses of knowledge and access? And if those safeguards failed here, where else might they fail? Media coverage intensified, but investigators remained careful. In high-profile cases, premature disclosure can jeopardize prosecutions. Authorities released only what was necessary, allowing speculation to swirl while they focused on building a case that could withstand scrutiny in court. Every piece of evidence had to be airtight. Every claim had to be supported. As months passed, the emotional toll on Gregory Rice's children became increasingly apparent. Growing up without a parent is devastating under any circumstance. Growing up with the knowledge that one parent is accused of killing the other creates a trauma few can comprehend. Their lives had been permanently altered, not just by loss, but by the complexity of that loss. Advocates for victims, families emphasized the importance of remembering Gregory not solely as a homicide victim, but as a father, a provider, and a man whose life had meaning beyond the manner of his death. In true crime narratives, it is easy for victims to become reduced to case numbers and legal arguments. Gregory Rice was more than that. He was a presence, now absent. As the case edged closer toward trial, prosecutors and defense teams prepared for a confrontation that would determine not only guilt or innocence, but the legacy of the investigation itself. Mistakes made now could unravel years of work. Every witness mattered. Every detail carried weight. The slow march toward accountability continued, shadowed by uncertainty. For those seeking closure, patience was not optional, it was enforced. And as the legal system prepared to take center stage, one reality loomed larger than ever. The truth about Gregory Rice's final moments was still incomplete. And the second half of this chapter would bring that truth into sharper, more troubling focus. If you're invested in this case, remember to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next on Dark Psyche Case Files. As the case pressed forward, the courtroom became the place where private pain met public process. Every hearing carried weight, not just for the outcome it might one day produce, but for what it revealed about the slow machinery of justice. For Gregory Rice's family, this phase of the journey felt endless. Time moved differently now, not measured in days or weeks, but in motions filed, continuances granted, and hearings scheduled far into the future. Prosecutors continued to frame Gregory's death as a crime rooted in control and coordination. According to the state, this was not a chaotic act fueled by impulse, but one allegedly carried out with intent, followed by calculated steps meant to delay discovery. The river where Gregory's body was found was no accident, prosecutors argued. It was chosen. Water conceals, water erases, water buys time. Defense teams pushed back forcefully against that narrative. They challenged the interpretation of timelines, questioned the reliability of certain statements, and emphasized that circumstantial evidence, no matter how troubling, must be tested rigorously. In a courtroom, emotion does not equal proof. Every claim must survive scrutiny, and every assumption must be dismantled if it cannot stand on evidence alone. This legal tension created a strange duality. Outside the courtroom, many had already formed opinions. Inside, the presumption of innocence remained the law. This divide is often difficult for the public to accept, especially in cases involving the death of a parent and allegations of betrayal within a family. But the justice system is built to move cautiously, even when the urge for resolution is overwhelming. As proceedings continued, more attention was drawn to the professional background of Christopher Allen Dauntel. The role of a deputy coroner is one of responsibility and trust. It requires objectivity, discretion, and respect for life and death alike. The allegation that someone in that position could misuse their knowledge struck a nerve far beyond Horry County. Discussions emerged about institutional oversight, about how much trust is placed in those who operate behind the scenes of death investigations, about whether systems designed to protect the truth are equipped to identify internal threats. Gregory Rice's case became part of a larger conversation, one that extended beyond a single homicide and into questions of accountability within public service roles. Meanwhile, Gregory's absence continued to echo through the lives he left behind. His children grew older without him. Milestones passed without his voice, his guidance, his presence. Birthdays came and went. Holidays arrived with empty spaces where he should have been. These losses were not abstract. They were daily, personal, and permanent. Friends and extended family members spoke quietly about the man Gregory had been, about his dedication to fatherhood, about his routines, his habits, and his sense of responsibility. These memories served as both comfort and torment, reminders of what had been lost and of why the pursuit of truth mattered so deeply. As months stretched on, the case tested patience in ways few are prepared for. Delays are common in complex homicide prosecutions, especially those involving multiple defendants and extensive evidence. But for families waiting for answers, each delay can feel like another wound. Closure remains just out of reach, always promised, never delivered. The media, while persistent, began to shift its focus as newer stories emerged. But for those directly affected, this was not a story with an expiration date. Gregory Rice's death was not content to be consumed and forgotten. It was a reality that shaped lives every single day. In this quieter phase, away from headlines and breaking news banners, the true weight of the case settled in. Justice, if it came, would not restore what was taken. It would not erase the trauma endured by Gregory's children. It would not rewind time. At best, it would offer accountability, a recognition that his life mattered and that his death demanded an answer. The slow grind toward trial continued, marked by procedural steps that rarely capture public attention but determine the fate of cases like this. Evidence lists, witness preparations, expert consultations. Each piece added another layer to a narrative that was still incomplete. Gregory Rice's story, at its core, was no longer just about how he died. It was about trust violated, about systems challenged, about the devastating consequences when personal conflict intersects with power, access, and opportunity. It was a reminder that violence does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes, it unfolds quietly, behind closed doors until it is too late. As Chapter 4 closed, one truth stood unshakable. Gregory Rice was gone, but his story was not finished. The final chapter would not only look at the pursuit of justice, but at what his case reveals about vulnerability, accountability, and the lingering impact of unresolved loss. If you've stayed with this case, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and hit the subscribe button to support ongoing investigations here on Dark Psyche Case Files. By the time the case of Gregory Rice reached its final stretch, the urgency that once drove the investigation had transformed into something heavier and more reflective. This was no longer about locating a missing man or identifying suspects. It was about reckoning with loss, with truth, and with the lasting consequences of choices that could never be undone. For Gregory's family, the passage of time had not softened the impact of his absence. Grief did not arrive all at once and then fade. It lingered, resurfacing in unexpected moments. In everyday reminders, in the quiet realization that life was continuing without him. Each new legal update reopened wounds that had barely begun to close. The justice system moved forward methodically as it always does. Hearings followed hearings. Motions were argued. Evidence was weighed not by emotion but by standards designed to withstand scrutiny. This process, while necessary, often felt disconnected from the human cost at the heart of the case. In courtrooms, Gregory Rice was referred to in formal language. In his children's lives, he was still simply Dad. As the prosecution prepared its case, the narrative they intended to present remained consistent. According to the state, Gregory's death was the result of deliberate actions carried out by individuals he knew and trusted. They emphasized patterns of behavior, communication records, and the alleged misuse of knowledge and access. This was not framed as an accident, nor as a momentary lapse. It was presented as a series of decisions with irreversible consequences. Defense attorneys, meanwhile, continued to emphasize the foundations of the legal system itself: presumption of innocence, burden of proof, the dangers of drawing conclusions based on incomplete or circumstantial evidence. Their role was not to satisfy public opinion, but to challenge the state at every step, ensuring that any outcome would be rooted in law rather than outrage. This tension between legal rigor and emotional reality defined the final chapter of Gregory Rice's story. Outside the courtroom, many had already decided what they believed. Inside, belief meant nothing without proof. The truth, whatever form it ultimately took, would have to emerge through process, not passion. For the community of Myrtle Beach in Horry County, the case left a lasting imprint. It forced residents to confront uncomfortable truths about proximity and trust, about how violence often emerges not from strangers, but from within familiar circles, about how systems designed to protect can be manipulated when safeguards fail. The alleged involvement of a county employee continued to loom large over public discourse. Even years later, the idea that someone connected to death investigations could be accused of participating in a homicide remained deeply unsettling. It challenged assumptions about who is capable of wrongdoing and reminded the public that professional titles do not equate to moral immunity. As media attention faded, the reality of the case persisted quietly. Gregory Rice's name was no longer trending. His face no longer appeared in breaking news segments. But for those who loved him, nothing had changed. Justice delayed did not feel abstract, it felt personal. In moments of reflection, advocates emphasized the importance of remembering Gregory as more than the circumstances of his death. He was a father of four, a man with responsibilities, routines, and relationships, a life defined not by how it ended, but by the impact it had while it existed. True crime, when handled responsibly, must honor that truth. As this case approached its conclusion, it offered no simple lessons and no clean resolution. Instead, it stood as a reminder of how fragile stability can be, how quickly familiar lives can fracture, and how the search for accountability often leaves behind its own scars. Gregory Rice did not choose to become part of a true crime narrative. His story became one because something went terribly wrong. And as the final outcomes drew nearer, one question continued to echo: not just who was responsible, but how such a loss could ever be fully acknowledged. Because in the end, justice is not only about verdicts, it is about recognition, about saying unequivocally that a life mattered. If you followed this case from the beginning, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and hit the subscribe button to support in-depth storytelling here on Dark Psyche Case Files. As the story of Gregory Rice reached its final stage, what remained was not just a legal case, but a legacy shaped by absence. Long after investigators closed their files for the day and courtrooms emptied, the consequences of what happened continued to unfold quietly, away from public view. This is the part of true crime that cameras rarely capture, the slow, enduring aftermath. For Gregory's children, life moved forward in fragments. Growth happened alongside grief. They learned to adapt to a world without their father's guidance, without his daily presence, without the assurance that he would always be there. No verdict, no sentence, no official statement could restore what was taken from them. Justice, even if achieved, would never be a substitute for a parent lost. In the broader community, the case left an imprint that lingered beneath the surface. Myrtle Beach returned to its routines. Horry County continued its work. But the story of Gregory Rice remained part of local memory, a reminder that violence does not always arrive with warning signs visible from the outside. Sometimes it hides behind familiarity, routine, and trust. The legal process surrounding the case reinforced a difficult truth. Courts are designed to determine responsibility, not to heal. They operate on evidence, procedure, and law. They do not operate on emotion, even when emotion runs high. For families waiting for resolution, this can feel deeply unsatisfying. But it is also what separates justice from vengeance. As time passed, Gregory Rice's name appeared less frequently in headlines. New stories replaced old ones as they always do. But for those who knew him, the silence left behind by that fading attention felt heavy. The fear that his life might be reduced to a case summary or a footnote was real. That is why telling stories like this matters. True crime, when done responsibly, is not about sensationalism. It is not about shock value. It is about bearing witness, about ensuring that victims are remembered as people, not just as evidence. Gregory Rice was a father, a presence, a life with weight and meaning. His story deserves to be told with care. The case also serves as a cautionary reflection on systems and assumptions. It challenges the idea that danger always comes from the outside. It raises uncomfortable questions about how power, access, and knowledge can be misused. And it reminds us that accountability must apply to everyone, regardless of role or title. In the end, the story of Gregory Rice is not only about how he died. It is about how fragile trust can be, how personal conflicts, left unresolved, can escalate beyond repair, and how the consequences of those failures ripple outward, touching lives that had no part in the decisions that caused them. For viewers, listeners, and readers, cases like this ask something of us. Not judgment, not speculation, but awareness, an understanding that behind every true crime story is a family navigating a loss that never truly ends. As Dark Psyche Case Files closes this chapter, Gregory Rice is remembered not as a headline, but as a human being whose life mattered. His absence is a reminder of why truth, accountability, and compassion must remain at the center of every story told in this genre. If this case has left an impression on you, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and hit the subscribe button to support responsible true crime storytelling here on Dark Psyche Case Files. Because remembering the victims is how their stories endure.